Hello everyone, welcome to this session. Today we are going to discuss the cranial cavity, and for this particular session we shall focus on the anterior cranial fossa. The cranial cavity has three depressions. This one in the front, an anterior depression. This one in the middle, a middle depression, and this one in the back, the posterior depression. These depressions are called the cranial fossae. One is known as a cranial fossa. So we have the anterior cranial fossa, the middle cranial fossa, and the posterior cranial fossa. Our focus for this video is the anterior cranial fossa. The anterior cranial fossa is the most shallow of the three cranial fossae. It overlies the nasal cavity and the orbital cavity. It is made of three bones: the frontal bone, the ethmoid bone, and the sphenoid bone. The anterior cranial fossa hath borders: an anterior border formed by the inner surface of the frontal bone, lateral border formed by the inner surface of the frontal bone, and the posterior border. The posterior border has a posterolateral part and the posteromedial part. The posteromedial part is formed by sulcus chiasmaticus of the sphenoid, and the posterolateral part is formed by the lesser wing of the sphenoid. The lesser wing of the sphenoid has these rounded parts at its ends. It is called the clinoid process. Since there are two, the clinoid processes. So these clinoid processes are a site for attachment of tentorum cerebelli. Tentorum cerebelli is a part of dura that separates the cerebrum of the brain from the cerebellum of the brain. So these rounded processes are called the clinoid processes. We are also going to look at the flow. The flow of the anterior cranial fossa is made by the orbital surface of the frontal bone, the ethmoid bone, and then the anterior part of the lesser wings of the sphenoid, and the anterior part of the body of the sphenoid. Those structures form the floor of the anterior cranial fossa. The contents of the anterior cranial fossa, we have this median ridge or middle ridge. It is called the frontal crest. The frontal crest is site for attachment of falx cerebri. The falx cerebri separates the two cerebral hemispheres of the brain. The other structure is this one here that looks like a comb of a cock. It is called crista galli. The crista galli is also a site for attachment of falx cerebri. On either side of crista galli, we have the cribriform plate, which is a thin sheet of bone, and it is where the olfactory bulbs sit. It also has a number of foramina that transmit vessels, blood vessels, and nerves. Next, we are going to look at the foramina. We have the cribriform foramina, where the olfactory nerve fibers pass. We also have the anterior ethmoidal foramen, where the anterior ethmoidal artery, the anterior ethmoidal vein, and anterior ethmoidal nerve pass. We have the posterior ethmoidal foramen, still around the cribriform plate, where the posterior ethmoidal artery, posterior ethmoidal vein, and posterior ethmoidal nerve pass. Lastly, we have this foramen between the frontal crest and crista galli. We have foramen cecum that transmits an emissary vein from the nasal mucosa to the superior sagittal sinus.